Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Aujourd'hui, on va essayer de répondre à la question: est-ce que le Coran est la parole de Dieu? Aujourd'hui, avec le témoignage du docteur Maurice Bucaille, l'auteur du livre La Bible, le Coran et la science.
Once more, its primitive meaning. To speak here of an adherence or a blood clot is a mistake. They are both derivative meanings quite out of place in this context. The evolution of the embryo inside the maternal uterus is a subject of reflection whose simple words correspond exactly to fundamental stages in its growth, as it appears in this verse of the Surah Al-Muminun. فَعَلَكْنَا لَلَكَتَ مُدْرَةً فَعَلَكْنَا الْمُدْرَةَ إِزَامًا فَكَسَوْنَا الْحِزَامَ لَحْمًا. We fashioned the thing which clings into a shewed lump of flesh, and we fashioned the shewed flesh into bones, and we clothed the bones with intact flesh. Thus, an initial aspect of the embryo is evoked, and thereafter the muscles covering the bones. We know that the embryo passes through a stage when some of its parts are out of proportion with what is later to become the individual. The Surah Al-Hajj seems to allude to this. فَإِنَّا خَلَقْنَاكُمْ مِنْ عَلَقَةٍ مِنْ مُضْغَةٍ مُخَلَّقَةٍ وَغَيْرِ مُخَلَّقَةٍ. We fashioned you into something which clings into a lump of flesh in proportion and out of proportion. In the Surah Al-Sajdah, there is a reference to the senses and the viscera. وَجَعَلَ لَكُمْ السَّمْعَ وَالْأَبْصَرَ وَالْأَفْئِدَةَ. God appointed for you the senses of hearing, sight, and the viscera. All these quotations are in harmony with what was to be discovered many centuries later. In view of the state of knowledge in Prophet Muhammad's day, it is inconceivable that many of the statements in the Quran which are connected with science could have been the work of a man. It is therefore perfectly legitimate not only to regard the Quran as the expression of a revelation, but also to award it a very special place on account of the guarantee of authenticity it provides and the presence in it of reflections which, when studied today, appear as a challenge to human explanation. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you very much for your kind attention. Assalamu alaikum.
I believe in theory of evolution as propounded by zoologist Gracie. If you do, then it is not compatible with teachings of Quran as discussed by Sheikh Abdul Mabood in his article.
Excuse me, but I do not know the article of Sheikh Abdul Mabood. Excuse me, so that I cannot compare with the theory which is not the theory of Professor Grasset himself alone, not at all, which is described in this book, What is the Origin of Man? I have written a small chapter about the creative evolution, is what is now absolutely sure, since now we know that the genome are responsible for the transformation of the functions of the cells, consequently to transformation of the of tissues and consequently transformation of the entire living being. There is no doubt about that. And recently I had the pleasure to read a book which was written by a famous Iranian theologian. Unfortunately, I cannot remember the name. Ayatollah, excuse me. This is a book which is translated, which is published in the United States at Berkeley. And this theologian, without knowing the least thing concerning science, by the examination of the Quranic, the examination of the Quranic text only, was able to come to the same theory of creative evolution. That is to say, the notion of a permanent creation for the living being through transformations of the genies and to obtain a certain evolution. That now the evolution is not absolutely, it's very well known, the evolution in the animal species, in the animal kingdom, is not absolutely continuous in the course of the time. Some species, after a certain evolution, came to a halt. This is very well known, with the two examples which are famous. It is one of the famous fish, the coelacanth, and the more something which is more common. It is a cockroach. The cockroach are the same one since 200 or 300 millions of years. Evolution is not continuous in the animal kingdom. As to man, it is another thing. It is transformations of the created human species. I have explained that in detail in my book, What is the Origin of Man? And unfortunately, I think I have not the time in 15 or 20 minutes to give you all the necessary explanation.
The second question is, what is the concept of time according to Quran?
Oh, it's difficult to give you an answer about concept of time about the Quran. I should be very pleased to know what is exactly the concept of time according to the Quran. Well, some scientists suppose that in the Quran there is an allusion to relativity. For me, I doubt. Maybe I am wrong, and they are right.
Could you please point out a few of the glaring inadequacies of the translation of the Quran that you came across?
At first, I want to explain you that if I have suggested to revise several translations from the Quran, it is only about a very small number of verses. That is to say, in my book, the Bible, the Quran and Science, I have quoted in the complete edition, not the edition that you have in the United States. I have written an index of the quotation from the Quran, and there is a little bit more than 150 verses. Only the verses which might be connected with science, and not at all. The verses having only an aim of religious teaching, not at all. So that it is a very small number of verses concerning science, but they are of the utmost importance. And I want to give you an example. I see before me a translation which I know perfectly well by Marmaduke Pixel. Since a long time, I used, for my studies of the Quran, translation in French and also translation in English. I used Yusuf Ali, which is a wonderful translation. I used in English also Marmaduke Pixel. But I think that, like I imagine, you all think that it is an excellent translation. But concerning a small number of verses, I cannot accept the translation of Marmaduke Pixel. For example, when I say for the word Sabaha, Yazbahu, Kulun fi Falakini Yazbahu. Bon, what is the translation of Marmaduke Pixel? I have controlled it before this lecture. Marmaduke Pixel, they float, because a derivative meaning of Sabaha is to swim in water. And they say float for the celestial formation. Maybe this is poetic, but it is not the expression of the primitive meaning of the word, which is to move